Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's version of Black Health Trust. We're so happy that you chose to spend some time with us this afternoon. I think we have a topic that should generate some conversation. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens, and our famed psychiatrist, Dr. Ivan Walks, and our famed psychiatrist, Dr. Lawson. So we're so glad you're with us. And we have an appropriate title concerned with what goes on in these days in Vegas and other places that constitutes addiction to gambling. It seems to be a way I may make some money on the internet today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ivan Walks, MD, MPH, who's a psychiatrist, formerly head of the health department in Washington, D.C., psychiatrist to presidents of the United States, and a member of the U.S. Air Force. And I want him to introduce his famed colleague, Dr. William Lawson, former chair of psychiatry at Howard University, and now at Georgetown. Dr. Walks.
George Washington.
George Washington, I'm sorry.
Don't make that mistake again, Dr. Maxey, or we'll have to send Dr. Lawson over to do an evaluation.
If Joe Biden can make a mistake, so can I.
Okay, we'll leave that one alone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am always excited to be here on Black Health Trust, and even more excited when I get a chance to share a stage with my longtime friend, Dr. William Lawson. Dr. Lawson is a psychiatrist extraordinaire. He's a physician and an educator extraordinaire. And it would take me the rest of the hour to go through even a brief summary of his credentials and his experiences. Suffice it to say that when universities from Texas to Washington, D.C. need a head of psychiatry, they will call on Dr. Lawson. When folks need a really eminent teacher who's able to communicate information well, they will call on Dr. Lawson. Just type him in and look him up, and you'll see that nothing I'm saying is hyperbole. Dr. Lawson really is one of those folks that has made a tremendous contribution to the field of medicine and the field of mental health over many, many years. I'm going to ask Simon to go ahead and start with Dr. Lawson's slides and let him run through. And the reason is I just looked at his slides and he's got some good definitions in there and he's got some good things. Mine, I will follow Dr. Lawson, which is, I don't know why I'm asking myself to do that, but I think Dr. Lawson can really set the stage for a great conversation. And we want this to be a conversation. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens has talked to us about how important this is. Dr. Maxey has mentioned how timely this conversation is. And so I'm really looking forward to filling enough for Simon to put Dr. Lawson's slides up first, and then for us to go ahead and get started with Dr. Lawson. If that's okay with you, my dear friend, William Lawson.
Okay. Okay, do I need to do a share screen? Oh, there it is. Beautiful. Do I need to do a share screen?
You're good.
Okay. Gambling, psychiatric and social implications. And let's see if we can move this. Well, okay, that's me. These already introduced me. Go back, you can read this stuff later. Next one. I don't have any disclosures today. We'll have some in the near future, but not today. Next one. Okay, gambling. Surprisingly, people don't know what it is. And some people who are gamblers don't know what they're doing. Basically, gambling is placing something of value at risk on an event with an element of chance in outcome, with the potential to win a substantial larger prize. Now, is this unique to Homo sapiens? Probably not, but it's certainly become much of a major issue in terms of Homo sapiens. And the important thing is a lot of people do it. But we're concerned when it becomes a behavioral addiction. Part of the issue that we often get is in the United States, it is in parts illegal. And so by definition, it is considered a crime if you do it. But on the other hand, if you don't use money, the other ways in which people gamble, for instance, the use of concept of insurance and by folks in the Muslim community is considered a form of gambling. As well as a number of different churches use various kinds of gambling procedures. But in general, when money is involved, something of significant value in many states is considered a criminal activity. We like to look at it, however, as a mental health, as gambling addiction as a mental health condition. It is very, very similar to the kinds of addiction you have with drugs of abuse, remarkably similar. And we like to emphasize in psychiatry that not only is it a mental health condition, but also that it is a mental health condition that leads to consequences and can be treated. So in brief, it's characterized by maladaptive gambling behavior. The maladaptive, obviously, is if you're doing it and it's not necessarily if it's illegal or not, but it's causing you clinical stress, problems with relationships, work, school, or finances. Next one. We estimate that gambling disorder affects the 4% of the U.S. population. This is grossly an underestimate. Obviously, people who have problems with gambling don't talk about it. For example, people will find that maybe 30% have suicidal ideation, and over 17% have attempted suicide at least once. Don't have good data on complete suicides because of the comorbidities and also because it's difficult to do a suicide assessment on someone that's expired. Next one. This is just again showing the problems. One is associated in terms of drug abuse, associated with drugs and addiction. We find that it's associated with homelessness, crime, violence. It is a cost in terms of the healthcare community, activities. Unlike drugs, it's not associated directly with any kind of medical condition, but there may be a link to some mental illness. It's often we hear people use gambling as a way for communities to raise money. If we can get a casino, we've said community is a way of gaining money. But we talk to economists, they invariably say that gambling, it doesn't work that way. The reason that one gambling is a form of entertainment, and what they basically shift money from other entertainment venues to the gambling enterprise. So there's no net gain in money in the community. And then the second thing is, as I said, it has these social consequences as well as addiction, and any kind of benefits to gambling to the community is offset by the consequences to individuals. Next one. Now, how do you know if you're gambling? You're frequently thinking about gambling, so you don't have to do it. But if it's preoccupying your thoughts, then you got a problem. Just like we see in terms of substance abuse, you start using it, it loses its value, you start having to use more and more to get the same kind of pleasure and excitement. Then people who have problems will tell you that they've done multiple things to control or stop the gambling, usually without success. And what happens is when they are deprived of gambling for a while, they have withdrawal symptoms. It's like you see in substance abuse. Not the same because you don't have the severe physiological consequences, but very similar. And then what we also find is that people use gambling as a way to get rid of negative feelings. And also we find an interesting phenomenon is that when people lose a lot at gambling, i.e. lose money, goods, or whatever, they don't stop. they do more gambling, what we call chasing losses. And they invariably downplay the problems of gambling. Do you gamble? Nope. How come you're in bankruptcy? I don't know. That's bad luck. But not from the gambling. And then they end up relying, since they run out of all their resources, they have to rely on other people to replace the money. And this is also where gambling gets linked into additional antisocial personality. And another telling element that a person has a gambling problem is when it affects finances. People go into bankruptcy, sell their cars. One colleague of mine had spent all his money flying to Tunica, Mississippi, finding out that they're losing their jobs, recurrent works, embezzling money, giving up their educational expenses, not attending the classes for students, and losing relationships, divorce, ending relationships by continuing to show the behavior despite these negative consequences. Next one. What causes it? Well, part of it is, we think related, just like in substance abuse, we find there may be issues involved with brain chemistry. The key element, of course, is dopamine. As we discussed before, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is a key neurotransmitter in terms of the reward centers of the brain. And what we find is that there seems to be a relationship between dopaminergic activity and gambling. People who have disorders like Parkinson's, who take dopamine agonists, end up becoming compulsive gamblers. And this is not just true for there. Other agents that are associated that increase the availability of dopamine, including the agents for attention deficit disorder and others, also associated with increased risk for gambling behavior. Identical twin studies show there's a genetic factor, very important. And we know that adverse childhood events are important, but the genetics may be more important. Key thing about gambling, again, that's difficult to really get good data because people may live in communities in which gambling is simply, financial gambling is simply, gambling casinos are simply not available. So if you don't know if the person has a disorder, but they're never exposed to gambling. Next one. So what we see is that it's associated with people who have impulsive problems. If impulse problem in one area, they have problems with gambling in others. People who are sensation seekers, gambling is great because it gives instant pleasure, not because of the gambling itself, but because it produces a high when they're winning, or even a high when they have episodes of winning. There's a compulsivity component. People with compulsive disorders have it, and people who make lousy decisions are invariably tied up in the gambling. And then we recognize mood instability. So alcohol use and other substance abuse disorders often associated with gambling. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? Sometimes you can't figure it out. Impulse control disorders, mood disorders. I myself very much studied bipolar disorder and found that many of those individuals invariably get tied up with gambling. And anxiety is a way of reducing the pain from the kind of suffering you have from anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and certain personality disorders. As we've talked, those that have impulsive control, borderline personality, antisocial personality, and so forth. So all of these comorbid or linked conditions may be tied in with gambling, which is the chicken and which is the egg, sometimes it's very difficult to determine. And if you have a person that has comorbidity, you really want to try to treat them simultaneously. Next one. And the treatments, psychotherapy does work, but unfortunately, because of the joy of involved in terms of folks with intermittent reinforcement, and we know from animal studies that people who get intermittent reinforcement are much more tied in and much more fixated to continue the bar pressing than folks who get continuous reinforcement or no reinforcement. Gambling is classical intermittent reinforcement. And so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, this is a recommended treatment. Motivation interviewing works. I have not been impressed with psychodynamic treatment in terms of treating gambling. Some folks say they've gotten results. I have not been impressed. Group therapy is used very often, and groups can be a very powerful factor, especially in keeping people in treatment, because again, folks who have a bad habit don't stay in therapy. And then family therapy, because that can be a powerful factor to offset some of the denial. Next one. Next one. This is just showing you that medication works as you would expect. This is just showing the different kinds of medication, antidepressants, naltrexone, just like it works in substance abuse, it also works in gambling. Paroxetine, antidepressant, lithium, and especially if you think the person may have mood disorder, and as I've stated before, a lot of people have unrecognized bipolar 2, which they never had a manic episode, they had a little hypomania, can be very, very effective in terms of using the agents for bipolar 2, which include not only lithium, but also some of the anticonvulsives, and more recently, some of the newer antipsychotics. Also, sertraline has been found to be effective, namifenin found to be effective. So again, the agents that we know have been effective in terms of substance abuse disorders have also been effective in terms of gambling. Can they be the sole treatment? Probably not. Can people respond without with psychotherapy alone and no medication? Yeah, I think so. It has happened. Again, we have to look, but we can try to provide all the instruments that we can to deal with it. And again, incarceration in the long run just simply doesn't work. Next one. Why do people use drugs? Same question. Why do you use gambling? Feel good, feel better. It feels good because people like novel experiences and they want to share them. Feel better, it reduces anxiety, reduces worries, fears, depression, until they start losing. Then, of course, all of these problems are magnified. Next one. And again, just mention bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and cyclothymia. Often, I found very common underlying gambling. And if you don't treat these disorders, you may have a very difficult time getting the person to stop using. Next one. Then again, because of the whole issues of slavery, the only way you can make money is to gamble, and the black codes. These are all factors I think will increase the life risk for African Americans. That is, that we simply do not have access to legitimate ways of making money, and so we have to turn to things like gambling and other things to be able to make money. Next one. So this is Gamblers Anonymous. You can see a psychiatrist, see social workers, counselors, can all excellent providers who've had experience with working with gamblers. And I think that many people who have experience working with substance abusers usually pretty good with these individuals. On the other hand, people who are otherwise very well qualified may fail to help because of what we call countertransference issues, concerns in terms of the whole criminal aspect to it. Some folks just do not like to treat people who have impulsive disorders. So it's important, if you don't find your first therapist to be effective, go to your second or even your third one who has had some experience. And that is it for my part. And open to questions, comments, and so forth.
Dr. Lawson, once again, you are amazing in terms of sharing information, and we appreciate that. I'm going to ask if we can go straight to my slides, because some of the things that Dr. Lawson mentioned, I will amplify on, and then we can go to questions and comments and really have a conversation about this. This is such a timely topic. So, okay, Simon, there you go. Thank you very much. So Black Health Trust, the next addiction. What are the odds? Yes, I was trying to do a little wordplay there. So was that the first slide, Simon? Okay, there we go. When did it start and why? If you think back to the first story about someone risking something, hoping to get a reward for it, we go all the way back to Adam and Eve. And then if you look at the American Psychological Association article that they wrote in 2023, just back in December, I think it was, they talked about this rush from uncertainty, this gambling, as Dr. Lawson mentioned, linked to reward processing, social and emotional problems. And they've confirmed this with some twin studies. There's also some talk about biological differences and a developing or smaller amygdala and hippocampus regions of the brain. So basically, it's not just one of those things where you say, well, oh, you're weak. Oh, you should do better. There are beginning to be uncovered some differences in our physiology, our biology that may help us to predict why some folks may have a problem with gambling and some folks don't. We also know that different parts of the brain mature at different rates. So teenagers and young adults may actually be at higher risk. Next one, please, Simon. There's also an impact in our, not just American society, but in our larger culture internationally of some recent changes. Of course, we know in the US, the Supreme Court, as Dr. Lawson pointed out, gambling is still illegal in many states, but the Supreme Court ruling now has gambling legal in 37 states. And that was at the last time. It could be 39 by this afternoon. I mean, it's really, really moving forward. Sports and our culture have embraced gambling. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens mentioned as we were getting started about kids being indoctrinated, and there's some research going back to something called a loot box. Until I started looking at preparing for this, I had no idea what a loot box is. It's when you're playing a video game and you have to spend money to click on something, and maybe in there is a special cloak that'll make you invisible or something that'll make you fly, but maybe in there is nothing. And so you don't know what's in the loot box until you spent actual money for it. And these have been banned in certain countries because it's a way of indoctrinating folks into gambling. There are studies that show, and I've put some of the names in here of folks who are studying this, that even at the preschool age, kids are being asked to buy things in games, and there are some social games that will then direct young people to these pay sites. So, and you go from risking your feeling bad to now risking your parents' money. So this is not something that folks are ignoring until you get to be an adult. Next one, please. And so, you know, Dr. Lawson and I agree this is a problem, but it's not a problem for everybody. Let me tell you who it's not a problem for. It's not a problem for DraftKings. It's not a problem for FanDuel, which is owned by a company I never heard of called Flutter. Somewhere in the UK, ESPN has their own sports book called ESPN Bet, MGM Sportsbook. It's not a problem for the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, etc. I could have just put another 35 et ceteras on here. There are a lot of folks for whom gambling is not a problem. How come it's not a problem? Why aren't they losing money? You know, anybody, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens and I and Dr. Maxey talked about this CBS investigation that they summarized on 60 Minutes. I went back and looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. We talked about AI, and I admitted that AI scared me. Well, I am even more afraid after looking at this. These sports books and gambling entities have these artificial intelligence algorithms that can monitor over 90 digital data points for each individual person. They don't care how much data. They will They will mine it, they will monitor it, they will engineer it, they will predict what will draw you in. If you try to stop, what will draw you back. They will individualize notifications to your phone, Dr. Lawson, to your email address, Dr. Maxey, that are just for you. And there's no limit to how many times you can get these push notifications. They can notify you 24 hours a day if you're caught up in that web already. So it's not a problem for everybody. Next slide, please. It's a problem for some people, though. Again, with this investigation from CBS, and I really appreciate some of the depth that they went into with this. There are 50 million people estimated to be betting just on the Super Bowl today. And there are about 50 million people who are sort of betting all the time. Of course, we don't know. A lot of the betting is secret. One of the things that I looked at was this notion that because the gambling problem is so new, or at least the notice of it, that there's not a lot of federal money out there yet studying problem gambling. As an aside, you all noticed that Dr. Lawson said he didn't have any disclosures today, but we want the smart people investigating it. So as they put some grants out, hopefully Dr. Lawson will be out there as one of the people investigating what the heck is going on, because half of people who are betting, according to a Siena University poll, they feel they're betting more than they should. And that's scary when you think you're doing something that's not good for you, but you keep doing it. What does that sound like? That sounds like an addiction. Folks are gambling entire paychecks. They're gambling loan money, school money. There was one anecdotal report I saw where people are you can go onto these apps and you can put in some link to deposit money to bet. There are people depositing up to 2,500 deposits in a year. That's a lot. That's over 7 times a day that you're depositing money. That's crazy. So the largest group of bettors, they say the largest single group are between 25 and 35, and people will bet on anything. People will bet. I'm going to get back to that in a minute, because I was surprised, even after looking at this, what people will bet on. But remind me to get back to some examples of what people will bet on. And there are some people who are distressed by what's going on and say, I need help. In New Jersey, there's been a 300% increase in calls to their gambling helpline since gambling became legal a few years ago, just in New Jersey. Next one, please. But when you look at, what are the odds? Who's really got the better hand, to use some gambling terms, right? I talked about the 90-something data points and the artificial intelligence that the sports books have to get us to gamble. What about the poor person who's gambling? They've got a 1-800-GAMBLER phone number that they can call. Because we don't have the research yet, we don't have the resources yet. And then, as with so many other challenges in our society, 90% of gamblers are estimated not to be seeking help. When the gaming industry leader was interviewed, it sounded like they were interviewing somebody from Big Tobacco back in the day, who said that, well, yes, there's an increase in problem gambling, but it's because we're paying attention to it now. We, the gaming industry, are paying attention to it. So it looks like there's an increase in problems, but it's just that we're seeing more of the problems. They were really looking at the Big Tobacco playbook, and they're really looking at the fact that, well, people should just not gamble if it's a problem. Those are what we're getting back from the folks who have all of the advantages on their side and who are getting smarter and smarter and smarter at how to reach us from preschool age all the way through. Next one, please. So ways forward, Dr. Lawson mentioned about mental health counseling and treatment and CBT. They're also, a part of which is CBT, there are also some some beginnings of research looking at stimulating parts of the prefrontal cortex, and that's being looked at for regulating cravings and emotions in not just gambling, but other things as well that get into our head and have us behaving against our best interest. Is that the last one, or is there one more, Simon? I think that may be the last one for mine. I just wanted to make an additional comment that when we find that entire multi-billion-dollar industries are doing something that may not be with the consumer's best interest, we should put our hands up in communities that look like ours and say, wait a minute, I know this is a problem. It may not be talked about every Sunday in church yet. It may not be talked about every day in school yet, but it's absolutely coming to a neighborhood near any of us. Now, let me, for those of you who say, well, I don't watch the Super Bowl, so I don't have to worry about betting. Dr. Maxey, can I just give a couple of examples of things that are being bet on today that have nothing to do with the game?
Go ahead.
Is that all right? Okay.
Good.
There are people betting. These are real bet opportunities. So Dr. Neighbor Stevens, you can sign off now and get on your app and start betting on whether it'll take longer or shorter than 86.5 seconds to sing the Star Spangled Banner. Will they show Taylor Swift on TV during the national anthem? Who will be the first person shown sitting next to Taylor Swift at the game? What famous Las Vegas landmark will be seen first during the broadcast? The Vegas sign, the Bellagio fountains, the Luxor Pyramid, the MGM Grand Lion, the Sphere, the Stratosphere Tower, the High Roller. You can bet on any of this stuff. It is amazing how much money will be made and what people are bet. You can bet on whether the coin flip is going to be heads or tails. And then, of course, everything you can imagine, including what team will punt what. While the game is going on, you can actively bet what will be the outcome of the particular drive that a particular team is on when they have the ball. And again, it's not about the outcome. When you talk to folks who have gambling problems, sometimes they aren't even paying attention to the game and who's winning the game. They may be betting on a sport that isn't even played in their country that they're in, but it's the rush of the gambling. It's the risk of the gambling that draws people in. And so they continue to look for that rush. As Dr. Lawson said earlier, as you try to chase that high, which is exactly what it is, you get further and further down a path that is harder and harder to back up. So I want to, again, thank Dr. Lawson. Every time I call on this brother, he is available and he is effective. So thanks, Dr. Lawson. I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Maxey.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh, and Dr. Lawson for a very excellent soliloquy on gambling. But let me ask a couple of questions. As you were talking, you mentioned one, that parts of the brain may be smaller in their development, that age was an issue between 25 and 30, and you talked about thrill seeking. And I happen to think about a patient that I saw yesterday, who was a member of a group in World War II called the Triple Nickel. And these were Black paratroopers who jumped multiple times, almost 100 times behind the lines in Europe and around the world. And then this gentleman was 107 years old that I saw yesterday. And after he got done with his thrill seeking as a paratrooper, he became a smoke jumper, jumping into forest fires. And then I found out that remember, he's 107 years old. In his 90s, he got a new girlfriend, a Chinese girlfriend, after his wife died. Is this thrill seeking? Is there anything that this has to do with endorphins or age or amygdala, or what does it have? Is there any way that this is related to what you're saying?
First of all, Dr. Maxey, the fact that this man got married in his 90s, I just want to celebrate and cheer that. I'm gonna let Dr. Lawson answer the question about what parts of the brain are doing what. But let me just say that yes, younger people are more susceptible to certain things that they aren't as susceptible to as they get older and they develop more. Go ahead, Dr. Lawson. And Dr. Lawson, tell Dr. Lawson, would you please tell Dr. Maxey it's okay for older people to have a little bit of fun?
I've heard that too. When you get old, you really appreciate how much fun it is to have fun when you're old. But and now I am old, I enjoy. I'm a former athlete. As some of you may know, I'm a national judo champion. And if you talk to athletes, I mean the rush in winning an athletic competition is something that I personally don't know anything else. Sex may be comparable in terms of it. What part of the brain is involved? What we know is it's a system that involves endorphins, dopamine linked together. Very important for survival. Very important for survival because it tells the body this is what you need to do in order to stay alive. So if you eat this kind of food, it tastes good, makes you feel good, so you keep on doing it. If you participate in sexual activity, the species survives. So this reward system is essential for survival, but it can be it can be taken advantage of. We know from animal research, you don't need much of a brain to be able to develop something called intermittent reinforcement. We can find in rats and other species that you episodically provide reward rather than every time, which is essentially the simplest form of gambling. You find that the behavior that's associated is very, very resistant to extinction, very, very resistant to extinction. And we find the same thing in human beings. Difference is that we got this neocortex that developed that sort of modulates that. And what I use cortex doing, and we now recognize neocortex does most things is inhibiting. And one thing it does is inhibits the limbic system from going haywire. But on the other hand, what we find, as Dr. Marks noted, is that for some people, that neocortex just isn't doing the job. We know that we can the lousy child rearing, certain kinds of reward system in early life, that system gets it's not it's not completely plastic, and some of this behavior gets locked in so that it persists until much, 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 much later in life. Now, there's some very interesting studies showing that there's actually a Chinese study in which they literally blocked dopamine receptors in the brain and took them out. And the folks stopped gambling and stopped gambling, stopped using drugs. They didn't live very long either. They're lousy lives. But all these chemical signatures can be modified. Interesting result is the GPT drugs, which seem to be not only inhibit eating, but also inhibit a whole spectrum of behaviors. And we also find the same thing with now naloxone, naltrexone, blocking a whole spectrum of behaviors. So we can block this system. It's just that it has to be very specific blockade because most people don't want to be able to stop enjoying sex, stop enjoying food, stop enjoying drinking water. Luckily, the human brain is very plastic, and as a result, it's fairly difficult to lock down everything. In animal studies, I have been able to lock down pretty much everything to the detriment of the animal. So there are chemical treatment opportunities that are out there that we're just beginning to explore. The question is, do people want to give up those elements of pleasure? And the other thing is to recognize what will people do, and I think Dr. Max, you hit it very well, what will people do for pleasure? And the list is endless. I won't even get into masochism, self-destructive behavior, and all. But I have had patients do all kinds of unusual ways of enjoying themselves. And if you watch YouTube, some of the horror movies at night, he's very impressive in terms of what some of the folks have been doing for this kind of behavior. The good
Dr.
news is,
Lawson, you
yeah.
have so much information, it's uncanny, so much information. But it occurs to me, as you're saying, people that have Parkinson's disease probably have no thrills, right?
well,
The dopamine is low.
what happens is that the rest of the brain sort of compensates so that many Parkinson's patients still can enjoy themselves. The problem is when we treat it, and when we treat it, we give them some dopamine agonists, which offsets that compensation, and so they go out there and have a ball. I have a personal friend, in-law, who the wife keeps a tight monitoring of his bank account because she knows exactly what will happen if he even looks at his casino. Now, I have another colleague who has a very successful career. It's when she retired, forgot that you cannot make infinite money. And so if she walks past a casino, if she'll walk past a casino or a shopping center, she will have to run in and have to have a good time. And I had a patient
Let's see,
who,
yeah. Let's see if we can get any of our audience in on this discussion. Anything in the chat, Dr. Walks and Dr. Neighbor-Stephens?
Not yet, but I have a question for the two of them, which is not as elegant as your drug studies and your lab animals. You made an allusion to something in your slides, Dr. Lawson, talking about the Black experience in this country. And I don't know if there's been any formal studies of this, but I've always wondered why numbers took off the way it did. I mean, it certainly didn't come anywhere close to what we are seeing now. And I'm not trying to say that. But what I am saying is that it was very prolific in the Black community in both the North and the South. I don't know about the West, but it was prolific in the North and the South. And I'm curious if you have any information about, was some of that the result of the stresses that had driven those who made it to the North and what those who remained in the South had to withstand?
I think there's turning literature on the question of the scientific, the proliferation of the numbers game. I think is a clear-cut example. And as a result of this, I think a large part, there's two factors. One is that slaves were socialized that if you wanted something, you depend on the master to give it to you. You couldn't earn it. In fact, it lived in a system. Slaves, some of you may or may not know, Black history, slaves couldn't inherit money. So you can work the daylights off, but your kids will never, ever get wealthy. And the result is, so how can a slave get wealthy? You have to work outside of the existing system, having such things as numbers and others. And even after slavery ended, if you have sharecropping, it's hard to get wealthy. But if you could do either selling drugs or have a modified gambling system, which is the numbers racket is, you can. It's very. It is possible for each person to make a lot of money. Each person believes that tomorrow they are going to hit the jackpot. You ask them, have you lost money? No, never. And if you look at the way in which it's funded, it's not based on chance. It's not based on the actual knowledge of the chance in terms of likelihood of getting successful. It's something based on, and since it's unregulated, the result is that many people had been exploited. But the alternative, of course, would depend on the existing system where they could never get wealthy. So that's the real challenge of our community.
Yeah. I'm on my broadcast. I'll call you back.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Maxey, was that your bookie?
Yep, it was. You want to know if I watched the Super Bowl? I said no.
So,
any other questions we have?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize there's a literature in economics I'm reviewing some of that literature today. People have studied this, mostly economists, and there are some African-American economists that have studied this extensively. Unfortunately, I can't.
So it was not a compulsion. It was a strategy.
It's a strategy that, if you look at it, has some rational basis for it. Sure, it's compulsion is part of it. So if you have negative adverse events in your life and you want some source of pleasure, this kind of step outside of the law opportunity to make money really was very, very, very appealing.
So let me just add to Dr. Lawson's point, very important point. Your question, Dr. Neighbor-Stephens, is a very useful question for us to begin thinking about. When do you cross that line between this is something that makes sense because I can't do something else, and playing the numbers was a pretty low risk thing until you started playing with your rent money or with your grocery money. Then
Would
it
you
became
add the
a
lottery
problem.
to your comments?
I'm sorry?
Add your thoughts on the lottery to your comments.
Same thing. There are people who, look, I went to Las Vegas when I was in high school. I lost a thing of nickels. A thing of nickels, I think, is still $2 worth of nickels stick in one of those containers, right? I've never gambled since. It took me a long time to make $2 after taxes back then. And I decided that it wasn't worth it to me. For me, the happiness of putting those nickels in the slot machine and pulling it was real. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I remembered having to work putting groceries in grocery bags to make that $2. And
is there a different psychology for the house?
For for the house?
Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, if you go back to one of the slides that I had up, they have tremendous sensical things that absolutely are on their side. All the AI algorithms, all the computer crunching, all the data points. I would not, let's say I am one of these sports books. I wouldn't waste money asking people to bet on how long it's going to take, was it Reba McEntire to sing the national anthem? Unless some algorithm told me somebody was going to spend a lot of money betting on that. And how would I know to bet that? I think the actual bet line the last time I looked was 86.5 seconds that it would take. That's how would I know that? I've got algorithms on my side. I have all of those things on my side. I think to just go back to what Dr. Neighbor-Stephens asked about, there are so many risks that people are willing to take that other folks won't take. People play the lottery all the time. But Dr. Lawson's point, it doesn't necessarily help the community. Dr. Neighbor-Stephens' question, it doesn't necessarily hurt the person. So we're looking at what Dr. Lawson gave us was a lot of signs and symptoms that it's not okay. You can play the lottery once a month with your spare change. That's not a problem. You play the lottery several times a day with your grocery money, it's a problem.
Let me throw this out before we run out of time from the chat.
Dr.
McFarland says that the discussion ignored the social factors that motivate gambling and variability and spectrum in controlling and managing gambling. Would either of you care to make a comment on that?
I'll just say he's right. The whole lottery system was developed because people say let's develop a legitimate alternative to the numbers racket.
Is there any relationship to the stock market?
I will only say that the difference is in gambling, if you look at the odds, if you continue to gamble on a regular basis, you lose money. It's built in the system. And if you gamble some of these things they put on the magazines and stuff, I saw one, the odds of winning is 1.5 million to 1. But there's a possibility you might get yourself a new car. You lose money. The stock market, as long as it's consistent and you can stay in it, you ultimately will gain money. The problem is that the stock is not, they give you the warning, past history is not a predictor of future success. And so you may hit a point, like just before the Great Depression, or folks I know who invest in historically invest in a tulip issue in Ireland. They lost big money. So there are winners. There are winners. The problem is for Homo sapiens, we think that we're going to be the winner, when in reality, the winners are very, 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 very few.
I just had a call from Usher, and he says for me to get people to make their last comments. Dr. Lawson, we enjoyed you. You have final comments.
Very simply, just like you look at in terms of the information in terms of the health, also look at the risk and also look at the little small inserts and risks in terms of any kind of gambling activity. It's as important as evaluate your health, your financial and economics as well.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lawson. You're always on time for us here. Thank you. Dr. Walks.
My final comment, Dr. Maxey, to look at Dr. McFarland's comments, and again at Dr. Rhonda Johnson's comments. This is a conversation that forces us to look at social factors that motivate folks. That was part of Dr. Neighbor Stevens' question about the numbers game. We until the Supreme Court said that gambling could be legalized state by state, there was this stigma about gambling. It was an illegal thing and you shouldn't do it. It was bad. And now we have to understand that our culture is shifting completely towards gambling being normal. The people that I love Jamie Foxx. I still remember him acting in Ray and winning the Academy Award. I like Kevin Hart, but I see Jamie Foxx most of the time now with MGM Draft Book. I see Kevin Hart most of the time now with DraftKings. And so the people that we are comfortable with socially are the people who are used to market to us. What does that sound like? Sounds like everything else. It sounds like dishwashers. It sounds like dishwashing liquid, dishwashing cloths. Every single part of our society, folks are looking for ways to market to us where they think they can reach us. And once they hook us, they will try to hold on as tightly as they can. And so our presentation today is really about awareness more than anything else. We don't have Dr. Lawson doesn't yet have a pill that'll cure you from your gambling addiction. But part of being the kind of physician that we try to be is to do the prevention part, making folks aware this is not just something to be taken lightly. It's important that somebody cares enough to spend, I think it was over $200 and something billion that was wagered in the last several years on legal gambling in this country. It's amazing how big this business is. So we really need to understand, as Dr. McFarland said, all of the social factors, all of the different ways that we are motivated to gamble, the physiologic factors that Dr. Lawson mentioned about different parts of the brain and how our brains respond to risk reward. This is a big deal. It's going to be an even bigger deal as time goes by, because these folks are in it for the long haul, and we have to be in it for the long haul as well on the other side protecting our communities.
Thank you, Dr. Walks. Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Steven.
Well, I kind of am on the same wavelength as Dr. Walks, except I want to go back to they are sucking our kids in. They are grooming our kids. We need to pay attention to what they are looking at and doing. I know they're not under your thumb every minute after they get to be 4, but somehow or another, as parents, and I know we love our children, we want our children to thrive, not just survive. We want them to thrive, but there's everything in the universe targeting them to take them down the wrong path. So please become aware of this, another threat to our young people.
Well, thank you so much. And as my final word, I want to remind you of 2 upcoming interesting shows we have. We have Dr. Ron Bailey, who's Chief of Psychiatry at LSU, who's going to come and talk to us about health and those who are incarcerated. And because we've had a U.S. cabinet member, Secretary of Defense, and a king of a nation have prostate cancer in this modern year, and which could even be serious, we have Dr. Brian Sohn coming back to us. So
We also have an autism talk coming next week.
Okay, and thank you so much, Barbara Neighbor-Steven. Have a great day, Simon. Enjoy the game, and thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone.